Hi, and welcome back to the History Machine podcast. This is episode 19 on young Pompey. My name is Niall, and my co-host is...
Cathal. Hello.
So hey, welcome back. I know a bit of a break. We had a bonus episode in between this. However, I have to say, straight off the bat, before we go any further, this is by far the longest episode we've ever had to do on a single character. And because it's so long, we're going to break this into 3 individual episodes. It's kind of mad, but it turns out that Pompey was around for a very long time. He gets a lot done, and his entire military and political career just stretches from his youth to his old age.
Yeah, usually it's like a spur-of-the-moment call that will split something out and record the second half later, but this one we can just... The notes you've written on this are absurdly huge. I think you have the bones of like a little history ebook on this already, just the page count alone. So this I think will be at least 3 parts.
Yes, yeah. We might even push it into a 4th, but we'll see how it goes. But I'd say for now, it's looking like a 3-parter. But to get started, we're going to have to talk about Pompey the Great. The first record, or the appearance, where we find Pompey in written history is in 89 BC. His father, Pompeius Strabo, besieged the town of Asculum in Picenium. At the time, Pompey's father, Pompeius Strabo, was a lieutenant of a one Lupus. From this battle, we have the Asculum tablets, and this is the first point in recorded history where our commander, who's going to make a big name for himself here, has his appearance. He's number 30 in a list of names. He's only 17 years of age. He is listed as Pompey. So Pompey was born on the 29th of September in 106 BC. His family held a tremendous amount of influence in Picenium. Now, in a sense of they were very much big fishes in a small pond. They owned large estates, but in a way, they weren't part of the traditional aristocratic classes. Now, Strabo, Pompey's father, he would be the first member of his family to reach the rank of consul. Now, this automatically raises his family to the rank of nobles or nobles, and he is effectively a new man. So this is kind of the nouveau riche kind of a thing. Now, it should be noted that even common people could raise enough money to raise troops and other funds for political purposes. Now, Strabo is an example of that kind of man. Now, Strabo's power and influence is due entirely to his clients. Strabo, when he has his time in power as the consul, he passes laws to naturalise auxiliaries who fight for Rome. To give you a small bit of a background into where he's from and his family and his setup and that kind of location, they're not the traditional powerhouse of Rome. Picenium has been conquered by Rome in 264 BC, and Pompey's family would have been Etruscan in origin. He would have been from a tribe that originated in a valley north of Rome. On Pompey's mother's side, he was related to the poet Gaius Lucilius. Funnily enough, he left some property to Pompey's family when he died. Where this starts to kick off for Pompey is in the siege of Asculum. Now, we have no absolute exact data for this. We don't know the fine tactics. We don't know the fine details of the siege. We don't know, who might have tried to do exactly what, but we do have some of the figures, which is enough for us to run a little bit of information in this. Now, this is almost certainly the battle where Pompey cuts his teeth. It's assumed as well that Asculum capitulated, and the aftermath of this was the rounding up and execution of the leaders, and Strabo, Pompey's father, would keep the majority of the loot that was obtained from the siege, even though at this time the Roman state desperately needed these funds. Now, Rome was a bit of a crisis, but here is Strabo, and here he is just taking all he can for himself. Now, because of this, Strabo gains a reputation of unparalleled greed, and he becomes extremely unpopular in Rome.
Yeah, like I don't know whether or not this is true, but I would not be surprised if that was just like the done thing, but it just happened at this time Rome needed the money more. And it was like, what a jerk. They probably would have done the same, but like, why won't he give us the money that he got? Also, for a quick side note, because this is only Strabo's only battle in the History Machine, it regards it as a solid win. As you said, there's not too much data. They had slightly bigger numbers, so it had it as 55% chance to win, which he did. But again, because we don't have much numbers, unsurprisingly, the casualties dealt over expectation, casualties suffered over expectation are both around average, because we're probably dealing with estimates that just kind of were averages of what you'd expect from a battle in that time.
Oh yeah, that's fair. No, fair play. So the apple's not going to fall too far from the tree here, or maybe it will. You'll find out later. So on the 25th of December in 88 BC, Strabo returns with his army and he celebrates a triumph. Now this will have a profound effect upon his son, having the idea that his father got to have a triumph. Now afterward, Strabo and Pompey would return home and they'd clear up any remaining resistance that they encountered along the way. In 88 BC, Sulla and a Pompeius Rufus, who actually is a distant cousin to Strabo, are both consuls. And in 88 BC as well, we have the notorious Mithridates VI of Pontus. We've covered this a little bit in some of our earlier episodes, but Mithridates raised a large army of, now numbers are inflated, but 250,000 troops. He invades the province of Asia, so this is around modern-day Turkey, and he issues a decree to kill all of the Romans in Asia. Now, a reported 80,000 Romans are killed, so this is very likely also an inflated number. It's like 8 guys died, and then, you pass on the message, and by the time it gets there, it's like 80,000 people were killed. No, definitely wasn't 8, probably wasn't 80,000. Whatever it was. But anyway, regardless, a lot of Romans are killed. Now, Strabo would have been very hopeful to get the command to tackle Mithridates VI, but the command instead went to Sulla. Rufus would align with Marius and the Marian supporters in Rome, and he would propose that Marius should take over as the commander of the Roman forces and deal with Mithridates VI. Now, Sulla's troops would revolt, and Marius would be exiled. Now, there's a little bit of almost a refresher of some of the information that we'd done in the Sulla episode. Now, Strabo would have been allied with the Marians, so there's no love lost between him and Sulla. And after marching on Rome and deciding to return to Asia, Sulla recalls Strabo and gave the command of Strabo's legions to Rufus Pompeius. Now, Strabo aimed to have this action vetoed. Regardless, when Rufus came to take command of the two legions, Strabo's soldiers kill Rufus. Now, the important thing to note, and this is typical of the time of the late Roman Republic, but Strabo's legions are loyal to Strabo. Now, this is the typical level of loyalty. The soldiers are usually loyal just to their commander. But Strabo would claim, listen, I had no part in this murder, but I suppose if he's dead and I'm the guy who's here and there's no one to command these troops, I should probably retain the command, which he does. So Strabo lays low with his troops during the Civil War, and he takes no major actions for or against Sulla or Marius. So he's very much taking the sideline and playing it cool. He's going to wait for this thing to blow over and see who you should join. Marius makes his return to Rome. Now, Strabo, among others, is requested to defend Rome from Marius. Now, it's not too appealing to Strabo, as historically he is aligned with the Marian factions, so he's not too down on Sulla, and he doesn't seem to get on with them too well. But Strabo's actions and what occurs later would suggest that he's double dealing here. There's some secret negotiations going on. There's possibly some, smoky room shenanigans. But whatever it is, there's possibly some double dealing. Now, it should also be noted that having Rufus killed, it would be fairly hard to claim that Strabo had no hand in it. And he's going to get very little support from the Senate. And he very likely would have been prosecuted for this crime at a later date. So he's not too keen on coming back to Rome and, defending the people who are probably going to put him in jail. Strabo, though, is hoping to get a consulship for the next year and then a proconsulship position and hopefully be asked to join the war against Mithridates VI. What's going to come up next, we don't really have enough data for the history machine to put into a battle, but the rough sequence is known and it's important to let you know what happens here, just, in the history of Pompey and his father. So, fighting occurs outside the city of Rome, and Strabo would fight for the Sullan faction. Cinna would advance and there would be a fierce battle with Strabo's troops, and Sertorius, who will come back again later, against a third of the army. So there was a fierce battle with Strabo's troops and Sertorius against about a third of Cinna's army. Nightfall would end this engagement, and then Marius would approach from the north and take control of the Tiber River. Octavius, who's a member of the Sullan faction, he would take some of Strabo's troops and he would attempt to dislodge Marius from his position. Fierce fighting would ensue and both would fall back. Now, it's believed that Octavius might have been able to force a win with one final attack, But on the veteran advice of Strabo, who even though at the time would have been a junior rank to him in the army, he prevents such heroics. Now this is really typical Roman behaviour, to deny glory to others and to try and maximise glory for yourself. Strabo has an upcoming election to win. There's no point he can't quite go, well, sorry, I did very well in that battle, but I have to give all the credit to my colleague. So it's really unusual, and you can really see the nitpicky nonsense that can happen in Roman politics, where this is a very important situation, and Strabo should not be given bad advice right now, but he does. But anyway, because of this, Marius and Cinna storm the city. So the lesson learned here by Strabo is also going to be learned by his 18-year-old son. Strabo and Pompey have a very similar temperament. An important lesson that Pompey would learn would be power lays not with the elected positions, but with the command of troops. It doesn't matter if you're the consul or the proconsul or whatever, as long as you have the loyalty of your troops, that is truly where you have power.
Sulla's going to teach that lesson to everyone very soon as well.
He will.
I think everyone in Rome kind of knows this pretty soon.
That is very, very true, Cathal. Oh, also, it's another lesson that he would learn is that the hardcore aristocrats in Roman society are unwilling to allow power or prestige to fall in the hands of any rival. And there's a serious lack of cooperation among the Roman patrician commanders when it is desperately needed.
As also evidence from the fact that you've just had these bunch of people fighting over who gets to fight the outside force.
So with Cinna and Marius in Rome, Pompey and Strabo's lives are in great danger. Pompey and Strabo's home in Rome is ransacked and plundered. Octavius is murdered by Marius as well. So, this is where all the purges and counter-purges are going to start happening. Now in 87 BC, this is a fun one, Strabo is killed. Now, there's two possible ways he died. One of them is dysentery, and the other was he was hit by lightning, or possibly both. So, I wouldn't like to find myself in that position where I have dysentery and I don't think my day could get any worse, and then I'm struck by a bolt of lightning. But he's such an unliked commander, and for his reputation for greed, it's almost viewed as a divine intervention, where it's like he was hit by a bolt of lightning. Jupiter just smote him down.
It's like your two options are the gods hated you and killed you for that, or you had the embarrassment of dying from dysentery, which is not a very glorious way to go.
No. I wonder did he die of dysentery and then they went, just say he was hit by lightning.
I mean, either one's pretty bad, but I guess, dysentery was probably more common. It is, yeah. The lightning thing is a bit out there. Also worth mentioning that Strabo, was his nickname. It meant cross-eyed. So this gives you an idea of his popularity, that he was known for that to all of history.
It's like if your nickname is Shady Fellow, it's like,
Yeah.
We'll move on a little bit. And in 86 BC, Pompey is charged with the possession of some of the loot that was illegally required by his father's sacking of Asculum. Pompey, with the help of a skilled legal team, is acquitted. Now, this needs a little bit of an explanation because it's quite a fun historical example of just the character and the events of Pompey's life. So Pompey, with the use of rhetoric, disproved many of the charges against him. Now the judge, Antisticus, took note of this obviously talented young man and decides during the trial to arrange a marriage to his daughter to the 19-year-old Pompey.
How good, there's being good at arguing, and there's impressing the judge so much he tells you to marry his daughter. Jesus. How good at speaking was he?
I think he was good at defending himself as opposed to less, of the ability of good at speaking, but either way, it's still working out. The judge realizes that this guy is a good family to marry into, and he's backing a horse very early with the hopes of bringing his family up along with Pompey. So, in hindsight, that's probably not a bad idea. A very, very shady deal during a court case occurs, and when the trial is over and Pompey is acquitted, the jury shouts out a wedding congratulations to Pompey.
This is like a soap opera plot. Someone goes in, has to have their day in court, and then it turns into a wedding halfway through.
Sorry, Judge, can I have a sidebar? I need to ask for your daughter's hand in marriage. So Pompey would stay in Rome from 87 to 85 BC, and during this time he'd befriend a Stoic philosopher, Posidonius. With the time spent together, they would deeply influence Pompey's character and his overall outlook on life. So he's kind of living the artistic life, but then again, he does come He is related to various kind of poets and artistic and literary individuals, so he has that kind of intellectual background that you may or may not expect from someone from an aristocratic or equite background. Back now to the main story. In 85 BC, Sulla was due to return in a year or so. So Cinna plans to move troops that would be used to fight Sulla, and he hopes to relocate them across the Adriatic Sea and give them some fighting experience and allow them to be recalled rapidly when needed. So, in summary, the plan is kind of like, these troops are really green. I need them to be good. I need them to be available to do things. I need them to have some kind of battle experience before Sulla's veterans come back and demolish us. So, just cross the sea, train them up. Wouldn't it be great? That'd be fantastic. That should work really well. Now, when the soldiers are asked to do this, they revolt, because it would be a stormy sea. As opposed to crossing the Adriatic Sea, they instead just kill Cinna. Now, according to Plutarch, the troops are afraid for Pompey's life when they kill Cinna, but, and this is the fear of a shipwreck is the much more likely and believable scenario. But this is kind of a hindsight, almost going back and writing, oh no, we fear for Pompey's life, so we should kill Cinna, when in reality it's probably, we fear for our own lives, and that's why we're going to kill Cinna.
Yeah, I too would not like to be sent across a stormy sea to pick a fight in the Balkans. It would not really concern me that the life of some politician was at stake.
That's true. And then again, that never seems like a good place to have a good battle in. So
no.
Now, so in 84 BC, the population of Rome is terrified at the imminent return of Sulla and his veteran legions. Now, at this point, many nobles are jumping ship and they're changing to the Sullan faction, and they're abandoning Marius and abandoning any kind of Marian support. And Pompey is one of them. Now, even as a young man, he would have been as good as any Roman commander to recognise the side most likely to win. So after Cinna's death, Pompey returns to Picnium. Here, he raises and equips 3 legions in record time. Now, these troops are almost certainly composed of veterans from his father's legions, and the speed of the levying suggests that he had this planned in the background for some time. Now, it should be noted, Strabo died before he could properly settle his legions, so a lot of them ended up just becoming layabouts struggling to find work in the Roman countryside. And at this time, they're almost certainly very eager to return to service under Pompey and win some funds. So Pompey would have appointed many of the same officers that his father would have used back into his own private army as he was raising troops. So Carbo, a Marian supporter, he goes to Picnium to raise troops, and Pompey actively hinders this recruitment. It's like, this is my territory, I've already started raising troops, and if you try and get other people, you're just going to find this is going to be quite difficult to do. And in the spring of 83 BC, Sulla lands in Italy. Pompey moves then with the intention to merge his legions as quickly as he can with Sulla's forces, and he organises the details for the additional legions to be finished raising. The Romans, Clunius and Junius Brutus, attempt to intercept and defeat Pompey before he can properly join with Sulla. Now, Pompey's intelligence from his troops provides him with excellent intel, and he's able to skirmish effectively and retreat to raise more men from local towns. So there's a small skirmish, a few little battles, kind of things, but what eventually happens is Pompey is going to get his troops to be able to meet Sulla. Now, the meeting where Pompey meets Sulla is almost mythical. So according to Plutarch, Pompey's troops are fully armed, they're marching in good order, they're looking great, and they've got high morale. Sulla, when he meets this force and meets Pompey, dismounts on his horse. Kind of unusual. Then Pompey salutes Sulla as Imperator, which is fair. But then Sulla returns Pompey with an unprecedented honour of a returning salute. Now that's kind of seen as like, wow, he must show this guy so much, love and respect, and kind of give him quite a few honours. Now, it should also be noted, and this is a different interpretation of that engagement.
Similar to the, not wanting to cross the Adriatic, we have another version of the story.
The possibly more likely version of the story. Pompey is 22 years old at the time, and he's a commander of troops. And all of Pompey's actions at this time are grossly illegal. And Sulla's salute might have just been an ironic response. Just like, oh yeah, I'm just going to salute you back. So, we both know we shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah. And also just a touch of like, what the hell are you doing, kid? Like,
Thanks for the legions.
do your parents know you're out?
Oh, your father died. Oh, sorry. Was it lightning or dysentery? So Metellus Pius and Marcus Crassus, and yes, it is that Crassus, also joined Sulla at the head of illegally raised armies. Metellus Pius is bringing his troops from Africa, and Crassus is coming via Spain. Now, it should be noted as well that Pompey joined Sulla after Metellus Pius and Crassus. So he's obviously weighing his options and then goes, yeah, this is definitely the right side to pick. So he's going to go for that kind of a way. Now, we're not certain what Sulla delegated Pompey to do in 83 BC. However, Pompey returns to Picnium to finalise his recruitment, the armament of his legions, and finish them up and get them ready for war. So in 82 BC, Sulla sends Pompey to relieve Metellus. Now, Metellus is having trouble up in the north. He's been tasked to defeat the then consul Carbo. Now, Pompey insists that Metellus invite him because Metellus is, of many things, he is a jealous man, but he is formidable, he is powerful. So Pompey is too young and too inexperienced here to really tick him off right now. So Pompey would really have been sent by Sulla to sort out the situation, but Metellus would not have been happy to oblige. So this is kind of just a formality to go, I don't want to step on anybody's toes here. So here we look at the Northern Campaign, or the Battle of the Asio River. So here there's going to be a 6-hour battle with Metellus and Carbo's lieutenant Quirinius, and this results in a small win, but a follow-up then of a blockade of Metellus by a reinforcing army led by Carbo himself. Cathal, what does the History Machine think about this engagement up in the north?
So History Machine felt that the Metellus side did have the advantage. It gave them maybe a 2/3 chance to win.
Okay.
Probably just due to larger overall numbers. They did do better on the casualty side, though. They dealt out about 24% more casualties than expected and took about 7% fewer.
Okay.
So a solid job by Metellus.
Fair enough. Even though, yeah, I know it sounds awful, even though he eventually gets blockaded. But messy, I suppose.
History Machine doesn't do strategy overall. It's just like,
it focuses mostly on tactics. Yeah, that's very fair.
This may be a theme.
Yeah, we'll see it. Now, in southern Italy, Sulla is at the Battle of Sacriportus. And Sulla would soundly, and I mean soundly, defeat Marius the Younger. So, Cathal, in comparison, what does the History Machine think about Sulla's battle?
So this one, similar odds, slightly lower, slightly worse odds for Sulla, but still kind of gave him a, 60% chance to win. However, the casualties dealt are 55% larger than it expected.
Yeah, so this is a brutal massacre.
He does a lot more damage than would be expected from the average commander here. While also winning a battle that, he was the favourite in, but not by a massive margin.
Okay. So, meanwhile, back up in the north, Carbo withdraws to the south, but en route, he's severely harassed by Pompey and his cavalry, who keeps assaulting his rearguard. So this is really an absolute pain to Carbo, but it's what is happening. He's fighting a rearguard action while he's trying to quickly head south to deal with Sulla as quickly and as effectively as he possibly can. Now, at this time, Pompey is acting as Metellus's cavalry commander, or the second in command. So this is actually the same rank Mark Antony would have had to Julius Caesar. Metellus stays in the north of Italy and begins moving some forces northeast. He is not going to be rounding up with Sulla to deal with this situation, but Pompey is going to head. So Pompey is transferred to command in the south under Sulla. So Pompey moves his troops southwest with Crassus, and they defeat Quirinius once again. And then he begins to besiege him. But however, Pompey carelessly allows his enemy to escape at night under the cover of darkness and a storm. Now, this is actually quite an embarrassing disaster for Pompey, because the idea is you have the enemy surrounded. He happens to escape. What's going on with your patrol? How did you let this happen? You have this guy's back against the wall. He is the main enemy. What are you doing? So not long after this, Pompey is going to try and make up for this colossal blunder to Sulla. Now, forgive me in the pronunciation of some of this stuff here, but after this, Pompey ambushes the forces of Marcus Censorinius.
Also, it's you can get it right and you'll probably be told, actually it's Censorius, but,
It's true. So the Sullan forces continued to blockade Umbria and Etruria, which allowed and aided Metellus' success in controlling the north of Italy. The Marian forces and the political allies are broken, and a mass retreat occurs across Italy. Now, Carbo flees to Africa, and some other of his legates and commanders, they flee to Rhodes. 10,000 Samnite and Lucaean troops who are incredibly, fiercely resistant to Sulla and incredibly anti-Sullan. They look to break Sulla's blockade, but before they do break that blockade, they decide, you know what? Rome is undefended, and we are the old enemies of Rome. And what we should do is we should nip this thing in the bud right now. We should strangle this metaphorical wolf, whatever we need to do. But the Samnites and the Lucilians, they're very, very keen to go, we're just going to put a death nail coffin into the Roman city. And this is absolute, utter, complete panic. So Sulla with these troops go, we have to immediately force march to Rome and deal with these Samnites, the age-old enemy. So that leads to the Battle of the Collian Gate. Sulla wins this battle, and because he does, he firmly secures control of Italy. Now, we won't go into the big details of this. This is not an episode on Sulla, but it just happens to be that this is all regarding, really, Pompey, and all of these events are happening around him. So it's important to mention them and where this will go from here. But Cathal, do you want to give the quick figures for the Battle of the Collian Gate?
Quick figures are similar to the last Sulla battle, but more so. He had just under 60% chance to win, which he did, and he dealt out about 2/3 more casualties than expected.
Okay.
So
now I've got two comments to make about that one. The first is, I don't think the history machine can really calculate the whole forced march tired troops kind of thing, because Sulla really pushes them really far, and when he's finished, what he's going to do is like give them a quick meal, an hour's rest or so, and send them out to battle. It's like we do not have time to mess about. So that's definitely a factor. Another factor that probably isn't really worked into this is how much the Samnites are skilled as warriors. They are veterans. They would have very fierce experience as troops, and they're fighting ferociously and determinedly against Sulla. So there's a big whole morale is high on that side, and the determination is very high on that side too. But there is differences that I think that aren't really picked up by the history machine between the last two battles, but they're kind of important to mention. But anyway, all that aside, Pompey didn't take part in that battle, but he shows up after Sulla's victory, and he isn't part of the big glorious win. But in 82 BC, we observe Pompey's behaviour and what he was like as a young commander, what he was like as the new guy, the guy in his late teens to early 20s, how he was behaving, what was his character, what was his ability, what was he like as a person. But we observe that Pompey is an efficient but inexperienced commander, and it's mad to say that he's inexperienced, but he's young. But he does what he needs to do for Sulla, and he is firmly part of the Sullan camp now. It is difficult at this time to accurately determine his military ability, but he is learning. Quirinius and Centurius both managed to escape his blockades. Regardless of these blunders, he still manages to impress Sulla to the point where Sulla will link himself to Pompey through marriage, and he gives him his first truly independent command. Now, if you remember back earlier with our little judge shenanigans, Pompey's first wife was Antistia, and she had unfortunately had her family purged by Sulla. So that judge might have picked the right horse with Pompey, but he didn't gel too well with Sulla. Now, Pompey would want to divorce his wife, so it's a really tough break for her. So Pompey is to marry Aemilia. She's the stepdaughter of Sulla, and she happens to already be both married and pregnant. But that's not going to put this marriage aside. Aemilia has connections to the really prestigious Metelli family. So sadly, shortly after the marriage to Pompey, Aemilia would die in childbirth. Just quite a little sad note to include in it, but that's what did happen. So in 86 BC, Marius is dead. Any resistance to Sulla and thereafter is often referred to as the Marians or the Marian support. Now the big task left is to hunt down any remaining Marian resistance. Where that is Africa, Sicily, and Sardinia. And these are very important to control because they're pretty much the bread baskets for Rome. So Philippus, who like Pompey had joined Sulla, was sent to Sardinia to rescue it for Sulla. Carbo had escaped to Africa, and that was Pompey's fault for that one. and he commanded a fleet which was successfully preventing food reaching Rome from both Sicily and Africa. So Sulla gives his new son-in-law the task, even though Metellus and Crassus would both be more senior in age and probably at this time by virtue, but Pompey gets the job. A couple of things to mention just about Pompey, because it just sounds like, it doesn't sound any different right now to an Alexander the Great or any other person we might be covering, but Pompey should not be in command of any troops. Now, regardless, he gets the following. He's going to get the rank of praetor, he's going to get 6 legions, he's going to get 120 warships and 800 transport ships. The reason he shouldn't have command of anything is he is simply too young. You are meant to follow the cursus honorum in the Roman system and work your way from the very start, get your small elections, work as a lieutenant or some kind of junior officer rank in an army for a long time, get yourself to a nice position, get elected consul, and then probably get full command of an army, or as a proconsul get command of an army. But he's the exception now to all this rule. And the reason he is the exception to these rules is he just raises his own troops. And most of them are troops that his father raised, and just brings them in and uses that as a leverage point to have full command of troops. So a really, really important thing to note about Pompey is from the age of about 18, he is in charge. He doesn't it's total wonder kid kind of behavior where it's you're just young and nobody tells you what to do. Now, ultimately he'll have to report to Sulla, but when he's on campaign, he's the guy in charge. There's going to be people on campaign with him twice his age taking orders from him. But that is where he is.
And anyone who tries to argue will just find themselves trying to marry off their daughter to him within a few minutes. So,
but yeah, that's where we are. It's awkward, it's unusual, but Pompey is illegally under control of troops. And they keep bending the rules and making exceptions for him. But this explains his really long and impressive military career. He's starting young and he's going to finish much later in life. Anyway, it should be noted that these ships that he gets, the 120 warships and the 800 transport ships, they would previously be under the command of Sulla. So these would be experienced, formidable, and most importantly, loyal troops to Sulla. Cicero speaks about this campaign, but that's 16 years later. But he comments on a couple of things. He comments on the speed at which it was planned and the logistical genius that's demonstrated by Pompey. Now, sadly, the finer military details aren't there for us to really discuss in detail. But just kind of keep that in your mind that it's rapid and the logistical ability of it is phenomenal.
As someone who makes spreadsheets for fun, I do really appreciate the guys who are just great at logistics, but as we've said before, and it will come, keep this in mind, History Machine does not. History Machine kind of rewards people who've blundered their way into a terrible situation and still win despite that.
Yeah, very much so. The History Machine likes to go, you're back against the wall. I want to see what you're like now. What's your metal made of?
Yeah.
So we know there's a commander by the name of Perperna, and he is a Marian commander, so he's loyal to the Marian faction. He abandoned his position when he observed the Pompeian forces approaching. Now, Pompey's task is to find and capture Carbo. This is the enemy he let escape. This is your job. You messed up, find him, and capture him. This is a perfect example of history just coming across random stuff. But by sheer luck, one of Pompey's patrols intercepts a fishing boat, and on board is one Brutus, who is a spy for Carbo. Now, it's not the Brutus that's involved in killing Caesar, but there are connections, but it's not that Brutus, but he is found. So Brutus commits suicide to avoid being interrogated. But he kind of makes a fatal mistake because he has accompanying fishermen who provide invaluable information. So the Pompeians now have Carbo's location of hiding, which they find out is just on a nearby island. So Pompey, acting now in the name of Sulla, he captures, tortures, and executes a 3-time consul of Rome. Now, when this news gets back to Rome, this completely and utterly infuriates the Senate. And they give him his famous nickname, Adolescentulus Carnifex, or the Teenage Butcher.
I mean, I know it's not meant to be flattering, but it does sound a lot cooler than the Cross-Eyed.
It's a better nickname. As much as he's getting it for a horrible sequence of behavior, it is a better nickname.
Yeah.
But Pompey manages to buy some good propaganda, keeping the remaining Marian faction supporters alone. So he's not going about purging and killing and doing whatever. There's logic to this, because Pompey is going to make some clients in Sicily and grant citizenship to some of his friendly allies there. Now, it should be noted that very few Roman patricians would bypass such an opportunity to make political hay this way. It's kind of like, while I'm here, might as well. Pompey had been given 6 legions. This is way too many for the task of just capturing Carbo. Now, only now was he made aware of phase 2 of Sulla's plan. So as dictator of Rome, a position that Sulla had resurrected for his own purposes, he sends messages to Pompey that the Senate have decreed that the army is now to be transported to Africa immediately. Now, African opposition was a much bigger threat to Sulla than the forces that were in Sicily. The Marian commander, Ahenobarbus, are in Utica with 27,000 infantry plus cavalry. Now, Pompey lands his army in Africa and hands over the command to his brother-in-law, and they rapidly move troops to Utica and Carthage. The speed of this operation frightens the Marian troops, and just because of the ability and, witnessing this happening in real time, 7,000 of the Marian troops desert. This almost certainly leads to Ahenobarbus offering battle to the Sullans before his army's morale can't drop any further and any more of his troops can't desert.
This is like when you add all the fear modifiers to your general in Total War and then they just run away as soon as they see you.
So, for this battle, Ahenobarbus lines his troops along difficult to reach terrain. He's trying to take advantage of this position. No battle takes place, but there is a very bad day of wind and rain. This storm just soaks his troops because they're out in the poor weather for the best part of the day. Ahenobarbus finally decides, you know what, we're calling this one quits and I'm going to return my troops to camp. Now, we have no word on if Pompey's troops were out under these conditions. We're kind of assuming they weren't. But on seeing the withdrawal of Ahenobarbus' troops, Pompey orders an immediate attack. And with a stroke of luck, the wind and rain change direction and they blow unfavourably at the Marian troops, and that hinders the withdrawal even further. Pompey's carpe diem attitude results in a spectacular victory, and less than 3,000 Marians escape. So this battle is absolutely brutal. And after it, Pompey's troops hail him as Imperator. So learning from his previous mistakes, Pompey orders an immediate follow-up and an assault on the Marian camps, and he makes sure you try and capture the enemy commander, whatever it might be. He only does this by foregoing the premature celebrations, and he ensures complete victory at the capturing and killing of the enemy commander. So, Cathal, do you want to go into what the History Machine thinks about this battle?
This is our first demonstration of what I was talking about, how the History Machine does not respect logistics.
Okay.
Logistics, like, win wars, it is probably the most important thing to be good at. But it's not, it's not romantic. It's not something you have great fiction written about. No one writes big things about, well, they raised lots of money and organized their troops very well, had good transport systems in place. No one writes big things about that. And the History Machine also doesn't care, because despite it being an overwhelming victory, the History Machine did appreciate that the casualties dealt by Pompey were strong. It was 33% higher than expected. Like, he dealt a lot of damage here. But it was a sure thing that he was going to win, according to the History Machine. It was like, nearly like 99% sure that he was going to win this. The History Machine just doesn't care, kind of because he set himself up too well. I mean, he had 6 legions as well.
Yeah, that's true. It's true.
That's a ton of guys. That's so many people. Once, Rome kind of falls, we're not going to see this in, this part of the world for a long time.
That's very true.
These kind of size armies.
It's crazy that that's the case. But I suppose this is a perfect example of Pompey, and this is the continuous plan you will see. This is the type of commander he is, where he plans everything. He will find himself in a position where I have more troops, I have better supplies, I have just a better starting game than you. And you're going to have to deal with that. And that's the problem of, all the work was done before the battle takes place. And, the whole idea of the amateurs think of tactics and the professionals think of logistics. And Pompey is, in this situation, a sincere and effective professional. this is what he does. Now, the tactics thing will come back to haunt him a little bit. Every now and then you go, not a great tactical example here, Pompey. You needed to do better than that. If you were better, not even good, but if you were better at the tactics, you'd be, really up there. But we'll discuss that a little bit further in later, just when we give some more examples. But it's just important to know this is going to be a very, very common theme with Pompey. But we'll really see, and the history machine doesn't like it, and I suppose it's a different measure of a different kind of a commander. There are two kinds of Roman commanders. The first type is the real Alexander the Great style. I'm going to be in the heat of battle, organizing a plan, being really flexible, changing it moment for moment, running around, rallying my troops, backs against the wall, overcoming the odds. Wow, what a phenomenal victory. And you go, that is one hell of a commander to be following. The second type of commander is the Pompey, or even the Tiberius was very similar to this. It is the planner. It's I'm going to spend so much time before this battle planning everything to the nth degree, making sure I've got all of my resources, all of my ducks in a row, all of my, supply chain completely and thoroughly secured. All of my logistics are sound. All of my plans and operations are ready. And then I just roll out a basic plan, and odds are, our army's way bigger, are much more, better supplied, ready to go, we're going to win the day. Both Roman commanders can be loved and hated for the exact reasons we've listed. The first one is the daring guys are loved because they're daring, and Germanicus would be an example of this, but like this daring, straightforward, larger than life, great leader kind of a character, and you go, that's fantastic. And when they win a battle, they are celebrated. But when they lose a battle, they look like an absolute idiot. It's like, why would you do something so bad and reckless with these troops' lives? This is not the way to actually win a battle. And then equally, from the other side, the real bean counter type Roman commander, they go, why didn't you take advantage of the initiative? Why were you spending so long planning? You didn't use the resources well. You wasted so much time, and then you lost. So both can be celebrated thoroughly for the way that they plan a campaign when they win, and both can be, absolutely bashed over the head for their seemingly stupidity when that plan goes wrong. So after this, Pompey still has to deal with the Numidians in North Africa. Now, they're still an issue for him, and namely, the main issue is King Hyarbus. So Sulla has a replacement Numidian king. He's got one ready in the wings and spare, ready to go. It's an ex-king by the name of Hyempsal, who was previously disposed. Now, this is important to note, but should Pompey be able to replace this king and put the one of their choice on the throne, he is going to undoubtedly lever him as a client. And this would be invaluable to Pompey, to have a client king in Africa who owes a lot of favours to him. So Pompey organises an advancement east into Numidia for the pursuit of Hyarbus. He simultaneously organises an attack from the west from an ally prince called Bugand, who is the son of the king of Mauritania. This is a very calculated move to instill terror once this pincer closes in, because the Numidians don't know that this is happening. Hyarbus continues to withdraw west, so he's using hit-and-run skirmish tactics and guerrilla warfare. In his mind, this war is going totally fine. It's the typical thing that I'm not going to engage the Roman legions. I'm just going to hit and run, and we'll get them tired, and they'll find themselves wandering around in Africa, not being able to do anything. But as he continues to withdraw west, he eventually runs into the hands of the enemy Prince Bugand at the town of Bulla. We don't have details for this, unfortunately. We kind of know the sequence of events, so we can't go into it. But upon Pompey's arrival, Bulla surrendered and Hyarbus was executed. So with this, nothing stops Pompey from reinstating the ex-king back into the throne, Hyempsal, and he restores relations to Rome. And then he decides, and this is always the fun little details of history, he goes on a grand hunt with his new Numidian friends, and they go hunting lions and elephants. A lot of fun. Now, as we've said, the talk about this campaign that really makes it so impressive, this whole African campaign, is that it took only 40 days from the initial landing to the beginning of this royal hunt. So, in the ancient world, this is a lightning speed.
This would be fast now, with, And we have, engines now.
Very good.
They had horses. That was the fastest they could go. Like, that's absurd.
So after all of this, and because of the unbelievable success of all of this, Pompey is set on having a triumph. Now, 7 years earlier, his father had won, and Pompey was adamant to do the same. So he had these grand ideas of an African-flavoured triumph, and he's looking to use some of the exotic animals they just captured on their hunt. And this is going to be a really, really cool and fantastic thing, and he's so excited about the possibility of having a triumph. Sulla instructs Pompey to send home 5 of those 6 legions immediately, and then await further instructions in Utica. Now, this is a critical moment. Right now, Pompey does have 6 legions. So he's going to play a trump card. Taking a leaf out of his father Strabo's book, he executes a plan, and he absolutely needs to be sure he has his troops' loyalty. Now, most of the troops had previously been Sulla's, so he needs to be sure that this army is going to have his back. So Pompey orders 5 of the 6 legions to disband. Now, as hoped, the legions refuse to forsake their imperator. Now, several times they request Pompey to keep his command. Now, Pompey, in undoubtedly a big dramatic show, retires to his tent in tears, and he's threatening to take his own life should they force him to do this. Now, he is almost certainly imitating actions and behaviours of his boyhood hero, Alexander the Great, here, when his troops had mutinied. So this is Pompey doing the over-the-top, ridiculous dramatics, trying to go, why would you do this to me? This is terrible. You shouldn't ask me to do this. You're all meant to disband. This is not what should happen.
Just emotionally abusive Pompey.
A little bit. Now, this over-the-top reaction, in combination with Pompey's Alexander the Great-styled haircut, almost certainly causes the next event. So Pompey's troops hail him as a new title, one used by his childhood hero Alexander. It is here that Pompey is called by his troops Magnus, or the Great. Pompey accepts, reluctantly, and he remains in command of the army with his brand new title. So as in 88 BC, where Strabo had claimed his troops and forced them to stay in command in spite of Sulla, Pompey is now doing exactly the same. This is a black kitten, black cat, apple not fallen far from the tree. Now, we don't know what communications must have happened between Pompey and Sulla, but Pompey lands all 6 legions into Italy, and Sulla is forced to accept the situation. When Pompey reaches Rome, he formally requests a triumph. Here, this is going to get quite interesting, because Sulla denies it. Sulla says, there's no way you are having a triumph, and I'm not going to give you one on the grounds that only a consul or a praetor could celebrate such a triumph. Now, Sulla also reminds Pompey that Scipio Africanus of the Punic War fame did not request a triumph after beating the Carthaginians or the Spanish tribes because he was not a consul or a praetor at that time. And Sulla also informs Pompey that you are very, very bold to think that you could compare yourself to Scipio, or even worse, somehow claim to be better. Sulla also tells Pompey off that granting a triumph on these grounds is going to look very, very silly because Pompey can't even grow a beard, and yet you're looking to acquire the most senior celebration that the Roman people could possibly offer you. And in doing so, this would reflect very poorly on the Sulla government, and worse, it's going to make you look juvenile, and you're going to have long-term effects on your honour, and people are going to point to this event and they're going to say, do you remember that time they gave a boy a triumph and that boy was you? So now it is said that Pompey gave a famous reply to these points, but it has to be noted he didn't say this to Sulla's face. Pompey's reply was, quote, "More worship the rising sun than the setting sun," end quote. Now, Sulla wasn't present when this was said, but there are a lot of murmurs, there's gasps, and there's gestures from other about court and about Rome. And Sulla decides to inquire, sorry, what is everybody so, kind of upset about, or, shocking? What's the news? And he learns what Pompey had said. Now, because of the absolute arrogance of such a remark, this is one now that could have had Pompey killed. But Sulla is said to have cried out twice, quote, "Let him triumph! Let him triumph!" End quote. So this is the whole I'm going to capitulate to this nonsense. But this could have been the death nail in Pompey. It's kind of like, oh, this guy's got some cuspa. This would be Pompey's first triumph, and he would spare no expense in the extravagance. So we know a lot about this triumph, which is great. It was held on the 12th of March in 81 BC. It was only 5 months after the point in which he had departed initially to Sicily. The triumph would officially be over the Numidians and not the Roman troops that he defeated. It would be an African-themed triumph. Just to add to this, Pompey would incorporate elephants into the ceremony.
Simpsons did it. Pompey demanded his elephant until they relented.
Yes, yes they did. So Pompey's plan is he's going to have his chariot drawn not by the customary 4 horses, but by 4 elephants. Now the elephant chariot runs into a snag when at the Roman Triumphal Arch when it's discovered, oh no, 4 elephants can't fit through this. So after many attempts, the elephants are detached from the chariot, and instead Pompey switches to the traditional 4-horse pulled Venus-styled chariot. Now this is associated with victory. Now, just to let you know, this is often sold as some kind of embarrassing mistake by Pompey, and it should, that's the way it's often told. But there's a more simple explanation to this, and it should be noted that the size of the arch might have been a face-saving excuse. This is often sold that Pompey is like, oh, they made a big mistake. I had this real cool elephant-pulled chariot, and then when we tried to pull it through Rome, we came across a snag, and we're like, I guess we'll have to go back to the old original plan. Isn't it a shame? Now, Sulla had forbidden such an absolutely ostentatious display by Pompey in an elephant-led chariot. So Sulla had, I want to say he vetoed it, not officially, but Sulla had said, no, listen, that's not happening. You're not going to get to do that. It is also very hard to believe that a commander such as Pompey, who had such attention to detail, would overlook the obvious measurement error. So this way, however, Pompey could have his cake and eat it, because he was able to assemble the forbidden chariot, show it in Rome, and then not use it, and that way he could keep Sulla happy. The rest of the triumph went off according to plan, with the exception of some troops who refused to march in Pompey's triumph. They claimed they weren't paid enough, and Pompey just waved them off. He goes like, don't care. This day is about me.
It would be kind of galling, though, to not get paid and then just see, like, oh, I guess we got to go with all these horses instead of the elephants I wanted to use.
Yeah. They're like, do you mind not spending so much money on elephants and maybe paying us? So, to minimize Pompey's glory, though, this is the whole triumphant young man, Sulla's going to allocate 3 more additional triumphs. 1 for battles in Asia to Mauretania, 1 for Valerius in his efforts in Spain, and 1 for Sulla himself. So Sulla figures that by staging more triumphs, he's going to devalue its political worth to Pompey. It's kind of like inflation.
Yeah. This is a solid plan, really.
It is. It's like, listen, you're not going to be the only guy who has a triumph. If I just give him out for pennies, then it won't look as impressive. So, regardless though, recently triumphant, Pompey is said to have doubled down on this whole Alexander the Great comparison. So, it was noted that Pompey had youthful good looks. He had an air of dignity and majesty, and he had a, quote, kind of glittering look in his eyes. But he adopted this characteristic way of styling his hair to include a little quiff. And you'll see them on the busts of Alexander, and you'll see them on the busts of Pompey the Great. It's kind of how you look at a bust and you go, has it got a quiff? Yeah, it's probably Pompey. It's either Pompey or Alexander. And it's the whole thing of like, I'm just imitating the style. Now, I think we should go back a little bit and talk about Pompey's career. Because we mentioned a bit earlier the whole idea he's too young to do things. Okay, he's not a senator. He has very few political connections or friends in power. He's thought by his peers to be really greedy and ambitious. He's used clients in place of traditional elected positions to gain power. He's learned that from his father. He's taken advantage of political turmoil from a civil war to advance just himself. And he's illegally raised legions. But he had the foresight to make himself indispensable to the most powerful man in Rome. That man being Sulla. He's behaving like a senior senator who has several consulships and campaigns to his name, and he's throwing his weight around, and he's winning a large following with the common folk without following any of the established means or methods. Naturally, the patrician class are going to look at this young bird and try and clip his wings by any means possible. So in 80 BC, Pompey marries Mucia from another absolutely impeccable family. After his triumph, there are no more commands for Pompey from Sulla, and it should be noted Pompey was the only friend of Sulla not to receive anything in Sulla's will. So I think maybe it's, I've given you enough in life. Let's not give you anything else. So the Sullan faction would look towards Pompey as the next generation's leading man. Now Pompey did have many military friends, including Labienus, Africanus, and Gabinus. But Pompey couldn't quite establish a political faction. He had some sound support from junior officers, and he had a couple of political contacts, but he's not a political powerhouse. Pompey would be exceptionally popular among the equestrian class. Now this is because he is their most distinguished member. He is not actually part of the patrician class yet. So the equites and the plebeians, they seem delighted at his refusal to join the senatorial class, and they're keeping up this idea that, he's one of us. At the end of the day, he's kind of a hard-working guy, maybe middle class. He's part of that middle class, and he's worked his way up to the top, and he's shown all those rich fellows like what's what. He's the working man who made it all the way to the top. So Pompey's immediate family are no real help to his career at all. He has an uncle called Sextus Pompey, who was a jurist and a philosopher, and he stayed well clear of political life. He has another uncle on his mother's side, Lucilius, who was content on his estate in the countryside. He's happy just to lounge out there, live his days. But during Sulla's dictatorship, a lot of people were purged, and many of Sulla's friends benefited from the wealth that was confiscated from these purges. But Pompey, this should be, there's an important thing about his character. He was never accused at a later date of enriching himself or wiping out any of his enemies via purges, unlike the other Sullan followers. So Pompey would have independent wealth from his father's campaigns and properties, and it would seem that he's cultivated a reputation of a kind of a candor, honesty, and a bit of moderation. Now, that's a bit
except for elephants.
Yeah, except for elephants. There are times when the elephant is necessary, and then deemed unnecessary or impractical. So after his triumph, Pompey is going to lay low until about 79 BC for the elections. Now, very likely, he returned home with his new wife and began raising his children. So in 4.5 years, his new wife, you see it, would give birth to 3 of Pompey's children. There's Gaius, Sextus, and he has a daughter, Pompeia. The lazy Roman naming system. Now, private life makes sense, though. Rome doesn't need a general at this time, and if he entered politics, Pompey would have to start at the very bottom rank as a quaesar. Now, this shows just how ridiculous it was that he was even commanding troops at the first point, because this is no place for a triumphant general of his caliber. This is probably why he shouldn't have had a triumph, because Pompey would have had many quaesars reporting to him under his command while on campaign. So it's the kind of idea of it's hard to think of a comparison. It's like, well,
it would be just like a nationally known figure just being like, no, you got to start in the local elections.
Very much so. So in 80 BC, Sulla retires. Now the new consuls elected are Vatia and Appius Claudius Pulcher, and the main concerns for the Roman government are Spain, because there currently exists a rogue general, Sertorius. Sertorius is a very interesting and formidable Roman. Sertorius was successfully holding out in Spain. He was aided by remnants of the Marian supporters, and he was aided by local Spanish tribes. Now, Sertorius had been praetor in 83 BC, but he was expelled by the proconsul. Sertorius fled to Africa, but then he returns to Spain in 80 BC. Now, he was actually invited by the Spanish tribes, the Lusitanians. Sertorius is acknowledged as a brilliant, inspiring, and adaptable commander. Sertorius was able to incorporate non-Roman troops into his army, and he practiced guerrilla warfare extensively. So in 79 BC, the proconsul of Spain was a Metellus Pius, and there was also the praetor Domitus Calvinius. Calvinius was killed by one of Sertorius' officers at the river Anes in southern Spain. Metellus is defeated multiple times in battle by Sertorius. Now, we don't have the details for this, but it's just noted that he's having a pretty hard time. So meanwhile, back in Rome, we still have some disgruntled veterans, some of who are settled farmers, some of who are just now layabouts because they don't have land yet, and They're just not fans of Sulla or his followers, and many were unemployed and had no access to the grain dole. In 79 BC, Pompey returns to politics with the intention of supporting an Aemilius Lepidus for the elected position of consul. Now, Sulla, who's in retirement, his preferred candidate is Catulus, and Pompey, though, manages to win it for Lepidus. Now, Sulla, even in retirement, is not happy with this result, and he's recorded as saying, quote, "Young man, I see that you're revelling in your victory. To be sure, it was a splendid and noble result for Lepidus, the worst rogue in the world, to be elected ahead of Catulus, the finest of all men, and thanks to your interference over the people. It is high time you woke up and paid attention to what's going on, for you have made your rival stronger than yourself." End quote. So it's quite the speech. It has to be said that after Sulla's death, Lepidus will be openly anti-Sulla. So, but before it, Lepidus is publicly friendly and supporting of Sulla. So Sulla is a pretty good judge of character here, who understands that, listen, Pompey, you are making your biggest political rival right now, and you're just giving him favours for no purpose. You shouldn't be doing this. In 78 BC, when Sulla dies, Lepidus tries to stop the burial plans in the state funeral. Now, Pompey will ensure that they go ahead as planned. And 78 BC, from the point of Sulla's death, is a messy year. So the sequence of events is not really certain, but we'll go through some of the things that happen. Lepidus plans an armed revolt against the Sulla faction with the aid of popular support. Lepidus is recorded as giving a speech attacking Sulla. Some people claim this might be while he was still alive, but that's incredibly unlikely. Lepidus also raised troops to attack the settled Sulla veterans in Eutria. The Romans fear they could have another commander march on Rome, as Sulla 2.0 is a very serious and realistic threat. Now, Lepidus didn't, though, have enough troops or support for a full coup. Now, I'll say this, yet. He did, though, manage to enact some reformations. He restored the rights of the tribunes, he returned confiscated properties, he recalled political exiles, and he brought back the grain dole. So by the year's end, Lepidus should have returned to Rome for the consular elections, but instead he withdrew to Eutria to recruit more troops. Now, the Sulla faction used this time to pass a consultum ultimum, and in early 77 BC they called upon the proconsul Catulus to take all necessary measures to counter this Lepidus threat. The immediate plan would be to gather troops and put them under the command of a competent general, but who could possibly match that description? So Pompey immediately gathers troops and marches to confront Lepidus. At this exact point in time, Lepidus lacks the available men and resources to be a legitimate threat to Rome. However, Pompey has some other objectives. Someone still has to deal with Sertorius in Spain. Normal events would now give command of such an army to a consul or a praetor, but Pompey was limited by his age, so he wouldn't be in that position. He couldn't possibly be given command. But if Pompey found himself in command of some other troops for a minor task, he could, through some political connections and a bit of personal gravitas, extend this command with some kind of senatorial pardon or the usual requirements, a little bit of waiving of the rules, as had been done before for him under Sulla. So this could work out very well for Pompey. With the command in Italy, with some raised troops, Pompey heads north. Now, Lepidus' commander near Gaul is a one Junius Brutus. Now, this is the famous Brutus's father. So Brutus had his headquarters in the town of Mutina, and Pompey moves his army north and blockades Brutus at Mutina. There is a lengthy siege, and they are starved out. Now, the siege is ended by the surrender of the commander Brutus. Pompey allows Brutus and some cavalry to go free. But then Brutus heads to a nearby settlement, and he whips up some support for Lepidus. So Pompey is not a man for second chances. He sends a legate, Geminus, to Rhegium, and he has Brutus executed. Lepidus is recalled by the Senate. In simple terms, just surrender now, that's what you have to do. Now, he obeys this recall, but he brings his entire army with him and they camp outside Rome, and he demands a second consulship for himself. With all of this, Catulus was able to raise some troops and hold out in Rome, so we have a very serious stalemate. But when the news reaches Rome that Pompey has defeated and He has killed Brutus. He's on the way to Rome, and the morale explodes. Catulus' army marches out and they engage Lepidus and they win a swift victory. Now, it can be fairly certain that Pompey's plan was to head south to Rome with his army, defeat Lepidus, but Catulus' actions denies Pompey another such important win. However, Pompey catches the remnants of Lepidus' army in retreat near Costa, so Pompey slips up though, because Lepidus and 30 cohorts escape and they flee to Sardinia, and they hope to block shipments of food reaching Rome. So, another example of Pompey just letting it slip through the cracks, which you'd think he should have learned this lesson in Africa, but apparently he has forgotten it. Now, Lepidus finds fierce resistance in Sardinia and he dies there. His legate, Perperna, takes over and sails to Spain to join up with Sertorius. At this point in time, the Sulla government wishes to kind of rein in Pompey. They claim that Catulus has dealt with Lepidus, and now, okay, Lepidus is dead, the threat to Rome has been ended. They could also argue that Sertorius will eventually be dealt with by a sitting political entity in Spain, and that entity is Metellus Pius. So it's important that the Sullan faction in government seem to be in control. Whether or not they are, it's important that they give that illusion. The reality is now that with Perperna in Spain, the balance of power shifts significantly to Sertorius' favour. Pompey is one of the few military men who understands the scope of the military task ahead in Spain. So he fights with the Senate to hold on to his command and journey to Spain. So this plan is working out excellently for him. It's the command of a few troops, then give me some roll, then send me to Spain. Catulus, Pompey's superior, orders him to disband his troops, but Pompey refuses, and he remains instead with his troops outside of Rome. Now, it also should be said that 10 years earlier, Pompey's father, Strabo, had done exactly this. Pompey would make weak excuses for why he couldn't disband the army one way or the other, and he'd make an effort to curb his openly obvious insubordination somehow. But the Senate now begins to think, he's not on our side at all. But lastly, it's important to say that the rumour going around Rome at this time is that Sertorius might march on Rome. Now, this is very, very unlikely. We'll learn about this later. But it's agreed that a new proconsul for a province near Spain should immediately reinforce Metellus. There's 2 sitting consuls, Brutus. Well, there's a lot of Brutuses in this episode. There's a Brutus and also another Lepidus. And
they need more names.
They do. And they both refuse command because they have Marian sympathies. They're kind of like, I don't really want to be in charge of this. You know, in fact, if Sertorius does march in Rome, I'd probably be in favour of that. Now, they would claim to refuse on grounds of a lack of military experience to deal with Sertorius. Now, Pompey's old mentor and a senior statesman, one Philippus, proposes that Pompey should be appointed. Now, to add insult to injury to the sitting consuls, it's proposed by Philippus, Pompey would be going out to Spain instead of representing a consul. He would instead be representing both consuls. And this would be a giant middle finger to the 2 men. It's kind of like, listen, if you guys won't do your job and this guy will, we're going to make sure that he's going out there representing both of you, because you're both cowards. So the Senate accepts Philippus' proposal, and in less than 40 days, Pompey recruits and provisions 30,000 infantry and 1,000 cavalry for his campaign. Now, he also has his trusty officer corps, including Africanus, Petreius, Cornelius, Gabinius, and Varro. And this is a much larger force as well than he had brought against Lepidus. So it's very important to note now that Pompey, at this time, he's only 28.
He's still not eligible for most government roles, yeah.
None of this, yeah. None of it at all. So, we're about to start the important Pompey goes to Spain campaign. So he goes to Spain via the Alp route, overland, and he defeats some tribes along the way. Now, Caesar records that Pompey defeated a tribe called the Saluvii tribe. Pirates may also have been a concern. This is probably why they didn't go by sea. The quelling of this tribe, though, helps explain his reasoning for going overland instead of transportation by sea. So it's kind of like, I'm going to deal with this along the way.
And another example of he will say it's because I'm going to hit 2 birds with 1 stone and deal with these rebellious areas. But then there's the other story of there are pirates around. He just didn't want to risk it. And
also the transportation by sea, it's not a guarantee. They have a much better chance of going where they want and doing what they want if they go by land. We've pretty much no details of the 77 BC campaign in the Alps and in Gaul. So we'll move on to the situation in Spain. Now, most of Spain at this time is under Sertorius' control. Now there's an exception of a small area in the north. Metellus is holding out in headquarters up in the north. Sertorius is headquartered for the winter at Castra in the south, where he's manufacturing arms and equipment for his troops. And he's also using his headquarters as a point to distribute goods and pay to his troops. So he's got a nice HQ set up, and he's pretty much settled in Spain. Pompey is hoping to secure command and control of the plains of Valentia, where he can forage for food and supplies and help some of his supply issues. So as a man in logistics, he's always thinking about how do I feed and support my troops, and he has come to the conclusion that if he can get access to these almost invaluable plains, he'll have plenty of food and he'll be able to sort plenty of supplies. Properna, the legate of Lepidus who had fled to Spain, has now joined Sertorius, and he's brought approximately 20,000 infantry and 1,500 cavalry. So he joins Sertorius' officer Herennius to guard a crossing at the lower Ebro River, and they make an attempt to lure Pompey into an ambush. Sertorius' other officer, Hirtulius, intends to keep Metellus penned in his province. Sertorius, meanwhile, is marching up along the Ebro River to confront the Barons and other tribes that have solicited aid from Pompey. Sertorius is looking to establish and control a base in northern Spain and relinquish as little territory as possible to Pompey while he's here, and he wants to limit Pompey's abilities to forage and gather any resources. So Pompey decides, now that Sertorius is attacking these tribes that have looked for aid from him, I'm just going to ignore their appeals. I'm not going to give any support to these two tribes. On a strategic level, this is the correct move. The tribes, though, are left for goners, and Pompey does not want to engage Sertorius yet, so he will not. At first, this goes well for Pompey. He controls the Ebro River and he's got no serious resistance or conflict, and he begins nearing his army to the plains of Valencia. Sertorius gets news that Pompey is outmaneuvering him, and how he had happened to slip past Properna and Herennius. Sertorius marches rapidly south to keep Pompey out of Valencia. Now Sertorius blockades the settlement of Laro, and the siege of Laro successfully diverts Pompey's attention, and he changes direction from Valencia to Laro. And Pompey has been lured into a very, very cunning trap. Here we're going to go into detail of a fabulous battle between Sertorius and Pompey. This is the Battle of Laro, or the Battle of Lorien, from 76 BC. Sertorius is alleged to have said that all he would need to do is to whip this young boy, aka Pompey, and not need to worry about the old woman, aka Metellus. So he's trying to go, you're too young and you're too womanly. That's kind of his double insult here. Sertorius has about 20 to 30,000 infantry and 2,000 cavalry. Pompey has 30,000 legionnaires and 1,000 cavalry, plus a couple of thousand auxiliaries. Pompey's forces are foraging in the local terrain and they're attacked. Pompey's troops hastily form some lines, but they are attacked mid-formation. These foragers are soundly routed. Sertorius' cavalry run them down before they can return to the main Pompey camp. Pompey becomes aware of the engagement and he sends out his troops under Decimus Lidius, who forces back the Sertorian cavalry, but then they encounter the Sertorian infantry while they're engaging them. And while they're engaging them, the Sertorian cavalry slips and reroutes behind the Sertorian infantry, swings back around and fully envelops and smashes them from behind. And this legion is massacred. Pompey reacts by taking his entire army out. He forms them up and he hopes to come to the rescue. Now Pompey has fallen into a couple of traps already, so he's very cautious that this attack on the legion could just be another one. What is he going to do? He's kind of paralyzed by the level of deceit here is too high. The tactics are quite good. It's hard for him to make sure what exactly is the right move. So Pompey just stays still. This might have actually been his best option. Odds are Sertorius was prepared for Pompey to march out and there was going to be another ambush. But a total of 12,000 of Sertorius' forces engage 10,000 of Pompey's troops and kill virtually all of them. Now, Decimus loses virtually his entire legion, and Pompey simply camps his army, unable to do anything about it, as he watches Sertorius burn Laro to the ground. So Cathal, what does the history machine think about this engagement?
So the history machine gave Sertorius a bit better than a 60% chance to win, which seems high considering the size of Pompey's army, but superior number of cavalry plus an ambush, it'll rate those in combination tend to get rated pretty highly.
Yes.
It was an interesting comment that you said about how it reflects. It feels like it reflects badly just Pompey just kind of not knowing what to do and just kind of not doing anything. But I think the history machine kind of agrees with you that it could have been a lot worse. The fact that only a third of the army were engaged, they all got wiped out, but because the rest of the army, this kind of ambush thing is where things can really get out of hand.
Yes, very much so.
So the history machine actually feels the casualties dealt by Sertorius are pretty much within expectation. It didn't go, despite huge number of casualties, it was still what the history machine expected, and we have seen lots of other cases where this gets really out of hand and they just wipe out even greater numbers.
Yeah.
So perhaps not engaging was the right thing to do, even though it doesn't feel like it now. But still a huge loss. And as I say, because of the setup of the ambush and with large numbers of cavalry and heavy infantry, what the history machine expects are huge casualties, and that's what you got. It just wasn't the entire annihilation of the whole army.
Very true. Now I think this is a prime example, and we can discuss it a tiny bit, but Pompey has his logistics fairly sound, but here he's against a tactical genius, and he's starting to really crumble under this pressure. Where it's he probably should have been able to do this, and I know we said the history machine gave Sertorius a good advantage, and that's probably because he's a veteran, and possibly because he was his terrain advantage or his location. He's got the home field advantage, we'll say, as much as he's been in Spain for quite a while. But this seems to be just a sound divide and conquer and tear apart your troops, and Pompey is just caught red-handed here with I am not able to deal with this situation, and I really need to make sure that I do. We've said it before, he's really good on the strategy level. His strategy is sound. This makes a lot of sense. It's get to the plains of Valencia, get there, sort out my supplies, make sure I've got the army supported, I've got plenty of supplies, I've got lots of people. We can bog down in here and make sure that we give Sertorius a very hard time, and we will whittle him away until he is no longer a factor. And here we see a dynamic battle where Sertorius just runs rings around him, tears into pieces, wipes out, some of his legates, destroys sections of his legions, just makes mincemeat out of him. And the idea that, as I said, Pompey is just, he is completely and utterly tactically deficient in comparison to Sertorius here. Sertorius is vastly superior on those grounds. Now, here's the good one where we said the logistics are so important. There's no point being a tactical brilliant if you haven't got the resources behind you. But we see Pompey is lacking in that tactical ability, and he is suffering because of it. But anyway, even after this, Pompey retreats north to lick his wounds. Metellus joins up with Pompey in the winter. Now, had he not, Sertorius likely would have followed up and finished Pompey. It's just chase him down, we've got him on the retreat, cut him to pieces. But now that Metellus has joined, it's kind of oh, okay, probably not the best idea. Now, while Pompey is struggling with Sertorius, the good news is the old woman, Metellus, or the nickname they'd given him, has dealt a crushing defeat to Hirtilius. As good as Sertorius is, his sub-commanders aren't as good. Now, so Pompey and Metellus desperately need more supplies, men, and some kind of support from the Senate, and the Senate is not happy to oblige them. What are the reasons for Pompey's failure so far? Quite simply, he's too inexperienced, even though at this point he's been given a triumph. He's a young man. He's had a couple of wins underneath him. He's had a few successful campaigns. They probably weren't against the best people. Right now, he does not have the experience of Sertorius. Pompey is also not familiar with Spain. He is not used to the guerrilla tactics, and he went into this campaign pretty much overconfident of his own success. Pompey didn't also call for help from Metellus, because he likely wanted to win this campaign single-handedly and claim as much glory as possible. That was a big mess up. Pompey also failed to scout. Now, that's a very quite Roman trait. You look up any Roman history, they seem to be ambushed all the time, or their scouts tend to be disastrous. But even by Roman standards, he's not scouting. Sertorius winters as well, and he receives help from a very, very unlikely source, Mithridates VI. Mithridates VI convinced the Marian exiles Magius and Phrynius to align with Sertorius. Now, Mithridates loans some ships and money to Sertorius with the idea of having Sertorius recognize Mithridates' claim to Asia. It's like, here's some ships, here's some money, just, recognize me. Now, Sertorius consults with his 300-man senate, so he's got his own little senate because he's like, the regular government isn't thing, I'm forming my own official government. This is kind of like a pope, anti-pope situation. And Sertorius comes back with a retort and he claims 4 points. Number 1, we refuse to abandon Rome's claim to Asia. Number 2, we recognize Mithridates' rule of Bithynia, Cappadocia, Galatia, and some other minor territories. Number 3, Sertorius, speaking in the third person like Caesar, will send military officers as advisors to you. And number 4, also, we'll take those 40 ships and 3,000 talents. We'll take your money, but we won't recognize your claim. While Sertorius is negotiating deals, Pompey uses this as some breathing room to take control of some small towns in the north. Now, in the spring of 75 BC, the Pompeians are looking to try their strategy again. Now, it was a sound strategy, it just wasn't as well executed, and the tactics let them down. Pompey heads south, he finds no serious resistance until he reaches Valencia, and here, Herennius and Perperna hold him at the river Turna, and they have their backs to the city walls. Pompey defeats them at the battle, and Herennius is killed, and 10,000 casualties are inflicted. Valencia is captured and sacked. So, Cathal, now that Sertorius is not involved in this battle, how well did Pompey do in comparison? Or how well did the history machine think he should have done?
It's just not impressed because he's too good at logistics. It just keeps expecting him to win the battles that he has because he's built up such a big army. It does at least grant him in this one. He dealt out about 10% more casualties than expected, and he took fewer than expected himself. But it won't kind of. It doesn't think it's impressive as a win over expectation because it just expected him to win. Mm-hmm. It had it as like a pretty sure thing.
Okay. No, that's fair if that's the case. I suppose with Sertorius out of the picture, you can see that they're able to capitalize on this because also Metellus has met Tertullius, and he wins a decisive victory as well. And he manages in this battle to kill Tertullius and Tertullius' brother. And similarly, I imagine, Cathal, the history machine has similar figures to that in the sense of like, they met him, expected to win, won.
Yeah, the stats are, like, again, it just thought this side's going to win. And this time the casualties dealt were about what it expected. Now, I mean, we can't like put in all the information we need in terms of, army fatigue and things like that. We just don't know, but with the information it's given, the history machine just isn't that impressed. It thought they won, but they should have. Okay, that's fair. Now, with this win though, Perperna retreats to meet up with Sertorius, and Pompey eagerly chases him. This is like, come on, we've got a victory, we'll follow up with it. This next sequence of events is not certain, but then again, what is? Well, but Pompey possibly acts quickly to deny Metellus any credit for the upcoming battles. And he looks to follow up on his recent win because his morale is high, and he hopes to engage Sertorius with only one army to entice a field battle, because if the Pompeians have two armies, commanded by both Metellus and Pompey, Sertorius might just go, listen, I'm going to slink back into the woods, go all guerrilla warfare, and you'll have to try and chase me down, and I'm just going to pick you off piece by piece. Similarly, Sertorius might also want to have a field battle with Pompey. Now, his reasoning is a little bit different. Pompey has numerical inferiority, so now would be the best time to engage him before he doubles his army. Pompey is also in unfamiliar territory, and Sertorius has a chance to end Pompey here and now and put a stop to any kind of sullen momentum. Now, Sertorius likely hasn't heard yet that Tertullius' defeat or Metellus' oncoming approach. This might also be factored into the plan for why this is going to happen. But Pompey's next battle actions can be interpreted as either a very well calculated attempt to minimize risk or alternatively, maximizing his personal glory. However, Pompey again has underestimated Sertorius. When they engage, Pompey's left wing under Africanus manages to force their way through Perperna's lines and they capture Sertorius' camp.
But on the left wing, Pompey suffers very heavy casualties at the hands of Sertorius, and he's defeated and loses 10,000 men. Now, for this battle, Sertorius deliberately weakened his right side in order to bring an overwhelming force to Pompey, with Sertorius himself commanding the assault. Now, Pompey is lucky to escape with his life in this battle. He is battling a particularly tall enemy foot soldier, while Pompey was on horseback, and he had been wounded in the thigh as a result and forced to dismount and abandon his horse. Now, this is kind of just the details of history. His horse was so richly adorned with armour and gold and valuables that Pompey's pursuers quickly abandoned chasing him and started fighting over his horse and the valuables. So,
I also love the detail of just like, oh no, he got wounded, but it was a particularly tall guy. He's not going to admit that it was some short guy who beat him up. It was really tall. It was really big.
You wouldn't believe how tall this guy was.
Wasn't fair.
He was up to stab me while I was on a horse. We were at eye level. But, so Pompey is really lucky to escape with his life. But on the next day at the break of dawn, both armies line up again to battle. But Metellus arrives and Sertorius' army withdraws. So, Cathal, what does the History Machine think about this engagement now? Where Pompey, in fairness, this is now officially down as a draw because technically, Perperna's side failed, but Sertorius' side won. But importantly, Sertorius is trying to go just smash Pompey. He's my bigger threat here. And you could look at this as much more of, this is probably a Sertorius win, but technically on the books it's a draw. But what does the History Machine think of this?
Yeah, that lines up because Pompey was given an 85% chance to win this battle by the History Machine.
He had an 85% chance of winning?
Yeah.
Whoa!
He really should have won it.
Jeez, he blew it.
Yeah. Given the resources at hand, the guy coming in with a horse that's that's covered in so many jewels that the enemy army go pursue that instead of chasing down
the
enemy. This is the army that should be winning. And to only come away with a draw when you have 85% chance of winning is not good. And and in addition as well, Sertorius took fewer casualties than would have been expected, whereas Pompey's army took about 5% more than the History Machine expected in the situation. So definitely, strategically kind of a draw, but definitely, neither army accomplished what they wanted to, but Sertorius, especially given that he's kind of maybe going a bit more hit and run, I think he can be kind of satisfied to get what he did out of that battle.
Jeez, I'd say, considering those odds, he should have been blown off the field.
Yeah, and that's, as we'll see, with Pompey's overall rating, when he wins, he's expected to, but if he fails to win, the History Machine just really hates him because he just thinks...
It thinks he blew it,
Yeah.
Wow.
He should have been kind of 100% winning all his battles with the resources he had accumulated.
Yeah. So, such was the position he had set up.
Yeah.
Yeah, that should have happened. That is crazy. Sorry, that should have been no. Just even for the listeners to let you know, when we see this happen in other battles, that this is probably a testimony to the tactical ability of Sertorius and possibly the minimal tactical ability of Pompey when the two meet, and you go, whoa, we just see a bonus.
Yeah. Usually in the History Machine, if you have a draw, it's not going to affect your wins over expectation much because battles average out to 50-50.
Yeah.
But for him, he's taking a 30, he's taking 0.35 damage to his, wins over expectation score for this battle.
That's insane.
Through a draw, it's most people wouldn't take that bad a hit from losing.
Yeah, I find from just a simple, sitting back analysis, this whole thing, what I'd like to do is I'd like to have Pompey organize the troops and then have somebody else run them. That might be the way to do this, because he seems to be great at getting everything lined up and ready to go, but then when it comes to the actual pulling the trigger, it seems to be Jesus, you mismanage it.
It's not his strong point.
No, definitely isn't. And unfortunately, as we said, he's dealing with a tactical genius on the battlefield here. This is a person that that Sulla's dead now, so he can't deal with him, but Sulla would have been the primary threat for him, and Sulla didn't go after him. He took care of Africa and Sicily first, and obviously took care of matters in Italy. It's keep that under control. But I feel like Sertorius and Sulla should have had a phenomenal showdown, and kind of really tested each other in that situation. But Pompey is unfortunate to be he is an inexperienced commander at this time. This is where he is, he's being shown the ropes, and he's learning, how to win a campaign here, or how to survive a campaign here. But geez, that's incredible. This should be over, but it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, I'll move on a tiny bit. So by this time, Pompey has spent most of his personal fortune funding this campaign. Now, such is the efficiency of Sertorius' guerrilla tactics. Pompey has been completely drained of his funds, and he's denied the ability to live off the land, so he can't even get it that way. So after continuous attacks on foraging parties, Sertorius is brought to battle near the Tulla River. So we have Pompey battle Sertorius again, and Pompey loses about 6,000 men, Sertorius loses about 3,000 men, and once again, Pompey has kind of been a draw. It's a draw, but it's a defeat. It's not working well for him. This is not really where he wants to be. He should have a win. And his only saving grace is while this occurred, Metellus manages to defeat Perperna and inflict 5,000 casualties. So as he's bogged down trying to deal with Sertorius in this awful, horrible tactical game, at least Metellus is able to deal with Sertorius's less competent commanders. So, Cathal, I imagine this must have, similar to the last battle, just a negative effect on Pompey, where it's like, you should be dealing with this. You should be winning.
Actually, this one goes more standard for a draw.
Okay.
This one, it was closer to 50-50. I think just because his resources had been so drained by this point from the previous battle.
Okay.
So this one, it doesn't hit him as bad. It's not like a positive for Pompey, but it doesn't really damage his overall score too much. Everything is kind of close to expectation in this one.
Yes. Okay. All right. That's a little better then. So at least okay. So actually, and contrary to my earlier statement there, this is actually a battle where it's not really affecting his stats so far, or his tactical stats so far. At least it's kind of going, okay, this was more of a coin flip.
But it's as a result, really, of the previous battle going poorly, that he was just drained a lot of the advantages that he previously had.
Okay, that's fair. That makes a bit more sense. So anyway, the following day after this, a daring attack on the Metellus camp was thwarted by Pompey, but not before Metellus himself got wounded, and Sertorius' officer, Memmius, was killed. Now Sertorius scatters his troops once again, Metellus withdraws to Gaul to winter, and Pompey retreated further back into northern Spain due to some supply chain issues. Now Pompey's saving grace here are his troops. Now they're really optimistic. Now given, considering they keep trying and they don't succeed, but they keep trying. Now Pompey deserves some credit for being able to instill this level of morale into his troops. Like, if you're going from draw and loss and awkward and guerrilla warfare and bad campaigns and not enough supplies, you think these guys would have just, strung him up somewhere or something, but he must be good enough, or must be making the right kind of promises, or, running the right kind of a campaign to go, all right, just keep the morale high. We're eventually going to win this thing, but you have to stick with me. And to his credit, this is happening. This is going to be Pompey's new strategy, is to keep as much pressure on Sertorius as possible, and to create some kind of rift between Sertorius and these Spanish or Celtic allies that he has around the area, these local tribes. Pompey asked the Senate for money. Remember, he's bled dry. He doesn't have, his personal finances are wiped. So he reminds the Senate that he could march on Rome if they refused to give him the necessary support. This is just, come on, you've been messing around too long. I have the armies, and I need to deal with this problem. And if you won't let me deal with this problem, I'll find a way to do that. Now, here's an example of a fantastic stroke of fortune for Pompey. Sertorius is murdered. So during the campaign, Metellus had put a bounty on Sertorius' head, and he said that should any Roman kill Sertorius, he'd be rewarded with 100 talents, which is a tremendous volume of money, and 20,000 acres of land, which is a fine colossal estate. And if you happened to be in exile, you'd be free to return to Rome. So this is pretty much a full political pardon, plus a lot of money and a lot of land. You would be set forever. So Sertorius responds to this new bounty on his head by dismissing any Romans in his bodyguard and instead hiring like a Spanish Celtic tribal bodyguard. He's going to do something similar to Augustus hiring Germans. It's like, this is going to be my new close and personal guys. I'm not going to risk it with just some with Russians. I'm not going to risk it with Romans in my bodyguard because, the bounty is so high. Now after this, Perperna invites Sertorius to a feast. Now here he is planning to assassinate Sertorius, but Perperna is worried. Sertorius is acknowledged as a formidable fighter, as in it's not just like that he's a good commander. It's like, listen, if you get in a one-on-one with this guy, he's probably going to be really difficult to kill in person, and you're probably going to be killed in the scuffle. Now, keep in mind, Sertorius is an older guy, but it's just acknowledged like that is his style. He is a really formidable one-on-one fighter, so it would be foolish to try and do something like that. So the party that's arranged for Sertorius is deliberately vulgar and designed to try and upset Sertorius and get him away from his guard. Now the event isn't going to plan, but eventually Sertorius decides to retire to a couch where he's immediately rushed and stabbed by Perperna and others. And upon Sertorius' death, it's discovered that Perperna is to be the main beneficiary of his will. So the men involved...
This keeps going back to soap opera rules, I'm telling you.
I thought you were my friend. I left you all of my stuff. So the men are not impressed. But after learning of Sertorius' death, most of the tribes in Spain immediately make peace with Pompey and Metellus. Now, this just shows the caliber of Sertorius. And obviously we've seen many a time Metellus and Pompey have soundly defeated Sertorius' legates and junior officers. So the local tribes go, listen, if Sertorius is not in charge of this army, then just jump ship. It's not worth taking the risk. There's going to be 3 more years of fighting, but it is going to be the kind of fighting that Pompey loves. It's going to be slow, systematic planning. It's going to be very, very calculated, very, very piece by piece, section by section, terrain by terrain, region by region. It'll be very, very, very straightforward. Now, funnily, one of the interesting tactics by Pompey was to request to garrison his sick and wounded troops in a town, but in reality, he would actually send his strongest and most capable men in disguise to seize the town once they were inside it. So, that worked tremendously well. So Metellus cuts his campaign short. He leaves all this small work to Pompey and retires to his province to enjoy himself, and hedonism ensues. So he's kind of just kicking back and going, it's all done. So Pompey finally gets to battle Perperna without the aid of Sertorius. Now, Pompey's tactics are reminiscent of Hannibal. He's using 10 cohorts, he scatters them far about as if they were foraging, he's waiting for them to be picked off in some kind of an attack, and once they're engaged by a significant force over a wide enough distance, Pompey's main army emerges from a hiding place and massacres Perperna's army.
I do like how his lure is the way that he nearly lost last time.
Yes.
By just like, it's like this time, instead of getting ambushed while foraging, we just make it look like we're foraging and ambush them.
Yeah, it worked well. So we've given him a lot of we've given him a lot of negativity here in the earlier battles, but he's learning from it. He is learning. Yeah. Anyway, during this battle, Perperna was found hiding in a thicket. So just hiding away in a bush. And once he's caught, Perperna offers to hand over incriminating letters from several consulars at Rome, which could be used for political blackmail and or purges.
Get me my Perperna soap opera.
Yeah, it'll work really well. It's not a bad one. So Perperna claims, listen, I found these among Sertorius' belongings once I'd murdered him. So there's these really incriminating letters. Now Pompey refuses to even see Perperna, and he orders an immediate execution and the destruction of these incriminating documents. Now he has them burned unread, so he doesn't care to extend the already 16-year civil war any longer. The civil war has served its purpose. We have some kind of stability. Why would I start another round of purges? If you remember from the last few rounds, Pompey himself did not enrich. There's no reason for him to do that. As much as that might have been offered as you'll see who your real enemies are, or you'll see who was really allied to who, or who was making, shady deals with Sertorius particularly. he doesn't want to do that. He goes, this is over. I'm not going to have to start a brand new campaign somewhere in Italy just to kill a bunch of Romans for the sake of doing it. It's over. The civil war is over. This serves no purpose.
It is just an interesting side of it. Like, he's taken a very different route to a lot of them, where he's built up his power mostly through like middle class or smaller nobility than the other guys. But then when things like this come up, he doesn't have to get embroiled because it's not the source of his power when it's amongst the senators, you know. He's kind of able to just decide, I don't need to do it this way. I have other ways of like getting my money and you know, getting my resources.
Very, very true. Yeah. So the war is wrapped up in Spain now, and Pompey offers a lot of clemency. Any soldiers of Sertorius who surrendered are offered safe passage, and they're allowed to start new lives in Sicily or Africa. It's like, you're not staying here. You've got too many connections. And for the officers, he says, listen, you can go back to Rome. You can live your own public life there. Do what you want. You don't have to be part of this anymore. You are Roman citizens. You can live your lives. I won't be like executing everybody. That's not what I do. I'm a cool guy. So Pompey makes sure to spread out these veterans and minimize any potential that they would kind of pool back together and form some kind of, you know, rebel legions. You know, the old rebel Spanish legion coming together.
He's merciful, but he's not stupid.
Yes, that's true. That's very true. So he also grants citizenship to some of the Spanish allies. This is very typical of what he does. It's like he's going to have some clients. He's going to get some favors in there. He's making political hay when he has the chance. He's doing it for long-term favors. It's very much the behavior of his father. He learned it from there. He's imitating it again. He makes his power and gets a lot of his prestige and favors from clients. It's what he does. So say what you want about Pompey, but with his victorious army, he doesn't do a Sulla or a Caesar. He doesn't turn around and march on Rome. He doesn't want to be declared dictator. However, on the way back to Rome, where you would think that this guy could be a very serious threat, he manages to deal with the remnants of the Spartacus slave rebellion. So we mentioned that one before. This is kind of where Crassus had dealt with the slave rebellion. Pompey comes in and he clears it up and kind of takes a lot of credit for it. And then Crassus kind of goes, oh yeah, well, I'm going to crucify lots of people and show that I was actually the victor of that one. So real pettiness between the two. But now you can see that Pompey has a great reputation because of his victory in Spain. And he is coming back. He is coming back to Rome as possibly the most important person. And possibly the person with the most amount of prestige and glory. And here you'll start to see the move on to his political career. Now we're going to stop it at this point and come back to, this is going to be a little later Pompey, and see what his political career and how that kind of feeds itself out. We don't want to concern ourselves too much with it. This is much more about the military history of it. We won't get into too many of the finite details of it. But he has already had this great victory. Well, he's already had this experience in the civil war that has finally come to the end. He's had his battles in Africa. He's had his battles in Sicily. He's had his battles in Africa. He has had his battles up along Gaul and into Spain. And he had started this inexperienced, but the steel has sharpened steel here. He is now very, very formidable with very, very loyal troops. And we're going to cut it off at this point and come back to Pompey again and see who is ranking where and why. And at the very end of all this, we can probably sum it all together and see who comes out on top. But what does a young Pompey look like? And what does the generals of the era of a young Pompey look like?
So in this episode, we covered 5 different generals who had 4 battles or more through, in the database.
Yes.
And it feels like it's a kind of greatest hits of some previous ones. Like, he has so much kind of... coming in at number 5 is Pompey. 9 wins, 2 draws, so that is another reason it's down a bit lower. Obviously, we haven't gotten through them all yet. It's a long career, like very few people in the database with that many battles, and I feel like pretty much all of them usually have like very stellar rankings because you don't get that many battles without being an exceptional like tactical commander. History Machine just thinks he's fine. I'm
going to say this is the first time we've had like the titular character rank last in the listing. Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah, History Machine is like, he's fine. His wins over expectation is just close to 0. It's not like he's tactically, a hindrance. He's not getting worse results. He's just very average. His wins over expectation, it's like within the range of error of just like 0.
I would have expected, like, honestly, normally we save the spiel for the end of the episode. We go, now to talk about the main character and all his whatever. Now, remember, we're going to have at least 2 more episodes on this guy, so we're going to come back to him and look, because he's got a long career. And, as much as there might be hiccups throughout it, I am very, very surprised that
History Machine really expected to win. So for any win he gets, his rating only goes up a small amount, but any loss he takes or draw he takes, the History Machine is just like, what the hell happened there? You should have won this.
Now, I'm going to play super armchair general on this one, but I'm like, maybe if he went through the normal course of period, the normal way to go up the rankings, he might have learned a better, he might have learned tactics a bit better and picked it up. And by the time he had command of an army about the age of 40 or so, he could have been like an incredibly formidable individual. Now, he'd definitely have less chance and less experience overall, because, it's experience is the teacher of all things, and obviously having had all that extra experience definitely benefited him. But I feel like you probably shouldn't be in charge at 18.
Yeah.
And then do what you want. And as good as you are at like organising, that's fair. But it seems to be that when you have to actually make the overall plan for the battle, and when surprising things happen, you just don't have the ability to improvise on the fly. And that's going to come back to him a few
obviously
times.
Obviously our knowledge is limited. We can only really speculate. But just by some of the descriptions, it almost feels like he freezes up as soon as things don't go to plan. Like he's so good at planning. Yeah. But once things diverge from that, or once he gets a few unexpected hiccups, he can't spur of the moment adapt. It kind of... He doesn't do a great job. It
seems to be a big problem. Now, maybe, because as we said, he's really good at... he is really good at the logistics part, but maybe you probably have to give some either fault and or credit to his legates and his underlings and his junior officers, because even if he's organising the army and planning the battle... they should probably also be the guys who, you'll see this with Caesar all the time, where a lot of his junior officers are able to, on the fly, with a bit of help from Caesar, of course, and maybe an order here or there, take advantage of the situation or do the right thing. And that, that probably comes with a mixture of instruction and experience from fighting with Caesar. But Pompey doesn't seem to be able to do that. If if it doesn't go to plan, they're like, well, there is no plan B.
Yeah. And, he has obviously is able to very well spot talent in terms of, political or financial benefits, but maybe just without having the same military experience, he's just not as good at picking out, who his commanders should be. But definitely one of the strangest results we've ever come across.
It is.
Other stats are a bit more normal. Casualties suffered, he's about average. Casualties dealt, he's a bit better than average. He deals out about 10-11% more than you'd expect, which is solid, and again probably comes down to the good planning. But he's hurt probably by like illegitimate not being as talented as many of the other commanders, and then also the fact that he set up so well strategic, like unusually good logistics for the era, that
yes
it just hurts his tactical score, because he's it's no big deal when he wins.
Now, as you noticed, like, this episode took a while to come out, and I love this episode because it was one that we let people vote on, and I was happy to let that do. So I was like, this is great. This is what people actually want. I'll talk about Pompey for a while. And it ended up involving so much research for such a long career. And when I was finished doing all of my notes on this, I came out just going, geez, I really think Pompey, like, the score is going to have to change. In a sense of, the first time we covered him, we were like, Pompey the Great, that's his name, but it's not really showing here. And I'm very surprised that with the updated History Machine and the changes and a couple of the additional battles added and more focus on his Spanish campaign and everything, that it isn't actually reflecting. Our initial analysis wasn't far off the mark, which, is shocking. But the more you read about him, the more you go, this guy's a logistical genius. You go, but the logistics only get you so far.
But that's not what we're measuring. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Wow. So who is, let's say if Pompey planned the whole army and had everything ready to go, who of the other 4 people are better than him? Coming in at number 4, Cathal.
So in number 4, a familiar face, Mithridates VI, who was just mentioned. 7 battles, 3 wins with 0.1 wins over expectations on average. So this is one where, like, he had a lot of battles. He didn't win that much, but he was dealt with much tougher odds than this is kind of, the inversion of that, where you're getting a solid score despite not getting the best results. When he won kind of with poor odds, and when he lost, he didn't have the best shot.
Now, actually, this is a fantastic person to make a comparison to Pompey with, because they both have had super long careers. Yeah. So if we look at Mithridates and kind of go, well, in the same position, Mithridates probably would have done much better than you with the army on the battlefield in that situation. And both of them are also, Alexander the Great kind of super fans. Yeah. So that's the case.
Alexander had the benefit of his dad setting up the logistics, so he was just ready to roll with a pre-made army.
That's very true. Alexander's almost the prime example of somebody who goes like, listen, this guy's a tactical genius and the rest is already set to go. All you have to do is just go. Yeah. So coming in at number 3.
Number 3 was Metellus.
Okay.
Who, it makes sense. We've seen him throughout this one. He didn't have a perfect record, but he seemed very solid, very competent, and that comes across. 4 battles, 3 wins, 1 draw, 0.175 wins over expectation, casualties close to what you'd expect. So he's just I think your solid, competent to good commander. Not one of the all-time greats in the records, but very solid, got the job done, and again, another one with kind of long career as not the maybe head honcho, but kind of doing well for the side he's serving.
It's funny because when we notice for this episode about young Pompey, when he first meets Metellus, or his first kind of under, he takes it very careful not to tiptoe, not to step on his toes.
Yeah.
It's like, this guy's a bit more senior, I better be careful, even though Sulla has sent me here to fix the problem. And that shows that Sulla has a lot of faith in Pompey to go, I'm sending you north to fix these problems. Please fix them. Don't leave it just to Metellus. He's probably, he's only average. Show me you're better than average. But interesting to see that, well, if we do look at it, Metellus has a couple of positives and a couple of faults, and the positive seems to be like this: he probably is tactically better than Pompey at this point. The age and experience is definitely showing. Now the big negative is when all is said and done and the battle is wrapped up and the campaign should be kind of close to finished, you will see Metellus just retire into absolute luxury. He just, it's like, I'm going to winter and have a lot of fun and drink a lot of wine and have a lot of, and have even more fun. You should just clean up whatever's left here because we no longer have an existential threat. So you can see that his character is it's a lot less virtuous than Pompey.
He was a solid worker, but he didn't make his whole life his work. He just, work wasn't his whole life. He got out and enjoyed himself when he was done. Yeah. And
this scoring is a little bit misleading because even he's ranked above Pompey here. But the idea is, I think if they went to war against each other, we'd find a situation where Pompey goes, well, I brought 40,000 troops and you only brought 30. You know what I mean? That's the big advantage Pompey has over all of these other commanders. He's able to... It'll come up later as a quote, stamp his feet and legions will step out of the ground. He's able to just levy troops super quick, get them to the battlefield as quickly as possible, and with lightning speed execute his plan. Now the plan doesn't seem to be the best, but he can execute it with such ferocity and with such superiority, and particularly numerical superiority, that you would probably bet if you need to win a war, Pompey's a better person to have than Mithridates and better person to have than Metellus. But in commanding the troops on the day, he isn't.
Yeah. But I mean, it's like we've said before, with the big empires like Rome, the difference for them is that they can take a hit and most other armies can't. And Pompey is kind of like the prime example of that, where he builds an army that is resilient and they can lose a battle or have a battle that, is maybe a Pyrrhic victory, and they'll just rebuild and come back again.
Because if he was in charge of some small village or a small tribe and he only had a couple of thousand men, that's kind of like, listen, if you lose, it's over.
Yeah.
And he probably would have been, stopped at the very start of his career, where it's like, oh, I'm sorry, but you cost us you cost us some war with another local tribe and we're obliterated now.
Yeah.
Definitely, the Roman system gives them that slack to work with, and I don't think almost any other society would be as forgiving with his behaviour as the Roman one is. So, coming in then at number 2.
At number 2, we have Sertorius.
Okay, fair play.
Which is... The impressive thing about that is that he has 4 battles in it. He's had 2 wins and 2 draws and 0 losses. So, his wins over expectation is 0.27. So that's crazy high for someone who has, a winning record that is,
about 50%.
A wins over expectation of 0.27 when you only won half of your battles and the other two were draws. That's crazy high. He had low odds in most of his battles and he still came out kind of on top.
Because we do have commanders who would have a better win record than them, but they go, no, you're not as good. And this is probably a good example of the history machine working in that sense, where you go, listen, if you have 40 victories but they're against nobodies, that doesn't, you're 40-0, but that doesn't really stand out to what you actually are as a competitor. And Sertorius, I don't think we have anybody who has that kind of a win-draw or win-draw-loss ratio that performs as well as he does. It's a real statement and testament to his total tactical ability. Now, Sertorius was an interesting one because he did show up quite a bit in our early dates on the database. He's a guy he's only now kind of being mentioned in episodes because we never really dwelt on the Spanish campaigns in any of the earlier stuff with Caesar or some of the earlier Roman episodes. He didn't really get to play a part in it, but you get to see this Hannibal-esque character. Now, here's a very important part about Sertorius as well. Most Roman armies are composed at this time of just bog standard legionnaires. They're equipped the same, they're drilled the same, they're armoured the same, they have like the same pay. They are a very uniform soldier type, which is incredibly unique and unusual in the ancient world. Normally it's a case of I band together a couple of war bands or local tribes or allies, and we all have different gear, different equipment, different resources, different quality horses, different everything. And the fact and the idea that Roman commanders at this time have that uniformity gives them a tremendous, tactical and strategic advantage over their enemies. But Sertorius is unique in the sense of he does have legions. But like Hannibal, he is able to incorporate different tribes, different peoples into his army effectively. And people don't get enough credit for that. If you meet another tribe, they speak a different language, or different regions, different parts of the world. It's very difficult to get them to agree to fight for you. It's very difficult to, give orders to them. It's very difficult to get them to stick around when things are going wrong. And Sertorius, like Hannibal, he's the most Hannibal-like Roman commander we have seen, because that fusion of different unit types into this standardized Roman army is an incredible feat, and you don't really see it done well anywhere else. We will come on later to Pompey when he's incorporating Greek and Eastern troops into his army, and he is not able to do the same. So it's definitely a case where you see this guy has that certain wow X factor, je ne sais quoi, say what you will, but he's able to do that. He's able to do that seemingly impossible thing where something that is so standardized, he's able to work around it and incorporate these troops. Not just incorporate them, but incorporate them effectively.
Yeah, it's a combination of he understands the Roman way of waging war. He understands legion.
Yes.
He has them himself, but then he's able to incorporate this kind of asymmetrical warfare thing from the area that he's taken over and take over the locals. And so he has that unpredictability. He knows his enemy so well, but they don't know him as well as they think they do because he's incorporated all these other elements that they're not familiar with.
Very true. And that adaptability is incredible. It all adds to, it all adds up in the long run. So yeah, we have to tip our hats there to Sertorius. He's quite the fellow. So coming in at number 1, who would give Sertorius a hard time?
And number 1, unsurprisingly, because he's someone who had his own episode a while back, it's Sulla. 7 battles, 7 wins, 0.29 wins over expectation.
Yes.
Casualties dealt are nearly 50% more casualties dealt than expected on average. It's absurd.
They should call him the adult butcher.
Yeah, he's much more butcher than Pompey was really. Yeah, if you want to know more, go back and listen to our episode on him.
That's very well. Thanks very much. Yeah. So that's no crazy surprise with that. Sulla is the guy to do with. There's probably there's a reason he possibly didn't panic because Pompey was in charge. There's probably a reason he didn't panic or have to go, I need to go and deal with Sertorius. Although I find that would have been a very interesting showdown, but it's a more aging Sulla. Maybe he would have had a hard time, or perhaps he knew better than many people that Sertorius is content in Spain, and we can always deal with him later. That's probably, I'm going to give Sulla the benefit of the doubt that he was well able to read people. He was able to read Pompey. He was able to read Crassus. He was able to understand Caesar was going to be a threat as a teenager. So I think his overall assessment of the political world of Rome and the Mediterranean at that time, he's like, listen, Sertorius is probably happy just to lounge in Spain. Let him be in charge of those tribes. When he passes away, we don't have a problem anymore. That's probably a very likely assessment that Sulla would have had about him. But either way, it was always, Sertorius was always the threat that loomed there, and Sulla comes out on top. Obviously, winning 2 civil wars really does it for you. So I think that's that. So we're going to wrap up for this episode, but we will come back again to discuss Pompey the Great. We'll see him in action. We'll see where he goes. We're going to see some of his logistics really rolled out on a grand scale that'll be so impressive. It'll definitely be worth talking about further and in much more detail. So thank you very much for listening to this episode. I know it took a long time to come out, but as I said, it's going to be a 3-parter. So I think you're all going to enjoy the next coming 2 episodes after it. So thank you very, very much for listening. I've been Niall.
And I've been Cathal.
And we'll see you again soon.